organization really saw a call to arms in this. The Pennsylvania Environmental Council leading to the formation of that statewide organization. Linda Box had served on a committee around the time that this book, after this book came out, that looked at leading to we now have the state greenways plan and a plan of connecting trails and so many things. But it was a call to action that the core communities could no longer suffer under the neglect of disinvestment and needed to be the targets of investment, just like you heard Denny speak about, and speakers as well. Tom's interesting because he came to it as a journalist. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning author, but yet he was a journalist and a prize-winning journalist as well back in his hometown area, and got motivated to be more than just a journalist. As he saw the insanity of the state subsidizing the building of new and the abandonment of old, and then trying to figure out how to fix the old, while they were the ones disincentivizing the investment in the old. Grade schools closing, building out. I really believe one of the biggest decisions this community ever made was building the high school near Youngstown, south of Route 30. You took the heart of the core community and put it out there. You have a great public education. The Greater Latrobe School District is great. But that single link was the biggest land use decision made for 200 years. I mean, 50 years that we already lived in since it's been moved, and 150 years of ramifications going out. You change the center of gravity when you move the high school down there, and it can't be put back. It just won't. However, many communities have done the same thing. They moved the core community, lost the heart of what it was. And Tom, among many other town advocates, have said, enough's enough. And so he wrote this great book. As Tom comes up, I'm going up. Jared, if you can help me move some of Tom's handouts back to the pizza room. And then I'm going to get his PowerPoint here. Tom, thank you for coming out to Westmoreland County and being a part of the discussion. When we have folks here from Pittsburgh, some of you guys raise your hands. In other parts of Westmoreland County, Indiana County, raise your hands. When I hear Tom was coming, if we had given more notice, we could have doubled the size of this audience because Tom's worth here. So let's find that PowerPoint. I guess basically just go ahead and thing here. This will warm up here in a second. Tom, please. It's all yours.
While we're waiting for this to warm up and get going, we've been sitting a long time, and I'm very conscious of that. I've actually broken my talk into 2 talks, and the first one is 32 minutes, and I'm not going to be the slightest bit offended if people start leaving at any point, but I would like you to go in the room where the food was. I have newspaper tabloids for you to pick up. One is about Dairy Township in Dauphin County, which was talked about earlier, and I'm going to be making some references to that. And then the other one is about trees and how trees can improve the community. So I would ask each of you on your way out if you would pick up both of the tabs on your way out. So I'm going to talk for about 32 minutes, and then I've said to Alex, we'll take a break, and if there's any hardcore people really willing to sit around and stay longer, I'll be talking for another 45 minutes if anybody's still around at that point. But the first talk is sort of like I would say an overview about smart growth, and then the second one is some specific things that you might want to think about, the kind of ideas you might want to be thinking about in Latrobe. So, is this about, can we get the lights down a little bit further?
There's no more lit.
Okay. All right. We're down as far as we can go. So, as Alex said, I wrote a book and did a public television documentary about 15 years ago about saving farmland. And the only way to save farmland is to encourage people to live in traditional towns like my town of Pottstown in southwestern Pennsylvania or your town of Latrobe. Now, Latrobe consists of land, it consists of buildings, and it consists of people. And buildings are more than just something that shelters us from the elements. It also gives us our sense of place and identity. For example, you take one look at this picture and you know instantly where you are. You know you're in London. You take a look at this photo, and as soon as you see the Eiffel Tower, you know you're in Paris. As good Pennsylvanians, I'm sure you recognize this as Independence Hall in the city of Philadelphia. Now, of course, I'm not from Latrobe, but I would guess that you might think of the Abbey, St. Vincent College as giving you a sense of place, or maybe this building right here, the Mellon Bank building, or perhaps a Mozart Hall would give you your sense of place and identity. Some of the buildings that make you feel special and different. In my town of Pottstown, the churches along North Counter Street give us our sense of place and identity. This building is very important to my wife and I. This is the one and only house that we've ever lived in. This is actually, we've lived here for 40 years this month. And then about 10 years ago, we bought the house next door, this 3-unit apartment building. My mother was getting rather old, so we moved her down from Bethlehem to the first floor of this apartment where she lived the last 5 years of her life. She was close, but not too close. So our house was already 100 years old when we bought it. This is a side view of our house in the early 1920s. And this house was built by a guy named William Duncan, and he had a daughter, Elizabeth, who grew up in this house. And in 1903, she got married to a guy named Erwin Warner. And back in those days, getting married, we got a front page story. Elizabeth Duncan wedded last night. And they were wedded in this church, Transfiguration Lutheran Church. And then they had a reception in the living room. The house which is now our house. They had a honeymoon. They came back. And they raised 2 children. And they grew old. And in the 1950s, they died. And then another family bought it, and then we bought it. We were the third family down in the house. This is, I'm that handsome devil here. And we bought this house primarily because of the location. It was very convenient to the Mercury newspaper where I worked for 22 years. This is the Mercury newspaper, and I'm going to show you my commute. I'm diagramming it for you. It was a very short commute. This is my house here. And this is the Mercury newspaper, and this is how I got there. It was out the kitchen door, through the backyard, through a municipal parking lot, in that white door, and then up to the second floor newsroom where I had my finger on the pulse of the thriving metropolis of Pottstown. Anyway, my wife taught for 35 years in our neighborhood elementary school. She had a little bit longer commute. Diagram that as well. She walked from Chestnut to Hanover, Hanover to Beach, Beach to York, and York up to Lincoln School. She'd do that in 20 minutes. In a cold day in the winter, she could do it in 15 minutes. Now, we like the fact that our house is next to a little cemetery where John Potts, the founder of Pottstown, is buried. And across the street from our house was an intermediate school. And we loved hearing the comings and the goings of the kids in the morning and the afternoon as they were coming to school. So we weren't just buying, a pile of bricks. We weren't just buying a building. We were buying community. We were buying a neighborhood with a sense of place and with a real history to it. Now, that intermediate school had originally been built as Pottstown High School in 1923. It was a very energy-efficient building. It was 4 stories with just an acre of land. In the 1930s, they put in a vocational wing. So this building had an auditorium, 2 gymnasiums, a vocational wing, very well insulated, centrally located in the middle of town, our most energy-efficient building, and yet, this was the one that we closed when we started having declining enrollment. And the reason was that this building did not have something that every educational institution needs in abundance. It didn't have a parking lot. So, it became a parking lot. They tore it down, and it's used by 2 churches that use it on Sunday mornings, and 95% of the week it's vacant. And that's kind of a microcosm of what we've done in Pennsylvania since around the Second World War. It's not just that we've been tearing down buildings, but we've been abandoning a way of life that served human beings very, very well for literally thousands of years. Now, we've torn down buildings in the past, sure, but in the past when we tore something down, it was in order to build something better than what we had before. I'll give you this example from France. This is the Champs-Élysées, perhaps the most famous boulevard in the world. The Champs-Élysées is lined on either side with 7-story limestone buildings. It has a wonderful pedestrian area. It has places for cars, a wide area, carefully protected by French law. But to build the Champs-Élysées and the other famous boulevards of Paris, the French, between the 1850 and 1870 or so, they had to tear down hundreds of say, 1850, before Napoleon III came over and did urban renewal. So, and here's a whole neighborhood that's being torn down just for one building, the Paris Opera House. But even though they were doing all this demolition, they were creating something better than what they had before. Most people consider Paris to be the most beautiful city in the world. And more than 60% of Paris today was built in just a 20-year period, from 1850 to 1870. And when we built Pottstown High School in 1923, we had to tear down 2 smaller school buildings and about 8 houses. But we were trading up. We were creating something better than what we had before. When we tore down the high school for nothing more than a parking lot that's vacant 95% of the week, we weren't trading up anymore, we were trading down. Let me give you one more example. This is my favorite building in the city of Philadelphia. I'm about 35 miles from Philadelphia. This is the former John Wanamaker department store. It's now a Macy's on the first 3 floors. This is an 11-story, built in 1911. It's an 11-story building, granite walls, marble floors, marble columns. It has a huge atrium with the largest pipe organ in the world from the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, that every noon has played a concert, every noon except on Sunday since the building was built in 1911. So if you're going into Wanamaker's just to buy a blouse or a shirt or a pair of socks, or you're just window shopping, and everybody, of course, can go into Wanamaker's, you're surrounded by this magnificent environment that greatly enhances the quality of your life. And when we look around our small towns in Pennsylvania, such as the city of Latrobe or Greensburg, or the many other cities and towns we have in our state, where did we used to do our shopping? On Main Street, where we had our best building and our finest architecture. And we all had to buy stuff, so when we're out there buying things, we're socializing with other people, and we have the ambiance of a beautiful area that's developed over hundreds of years. But after the war, what do we do with those ugly boxes surrounded by huge acres and acres of blacktop in order to save a little bit of money, and we call this, better. So, when we look at the history of our country over the last 50 or 60 years, we're awestruck by technological advances. I mean, we have computers, we have smartphones, we have iPads, and now thanks to Google Earth, you can look anywhere in the globe. You can go down to the street level, you can see it from above. You can go on YouTube and see a million different things. You can see the finest professors lecturing on YouTube. Or you can search for almost any bit of information on Google Earth. That's all great. And all the knowledge in our colleges and universities are now at everybody's fingertips. Like right here, if I wanted to with my smartphone. But when we abandon our traditional neighborhoods with the beautiful homes, with the walkability, and traded it in for this low-density drive everywhere for everybody sprawl, when we abandon our traditional downtowns and replace it with the Lincoln Highway jumpscape, were we trading up, or have we actually been, over the last 50 years, trading down? Now, Pennsylvania, as you probably know, is mostly forested. We're 60% farmland, 60% forested. We're 20% farmland. We're 20% the things we build. Now, for most of human history, we put our buildings very close to each other. And there was a good reason, because if you wanted to go from one building to another, whatever the purpose was, you had to walk. Unless you had some money, you could have a horse. Or if you had a lot of money, you could sit in a carriage and be drawn by a horse. But nonetheless, you had to put your buildings close together because everything was on foot or horseback. Even in the 1800s, when the train comes along, when the trolleys come along, you still have to walk to the train station, you still have to walk to the bus. And then in the 1880s, we have the next big revolution in transportation, and that's the safety bicycle. And a bicycle can go about 2 or 3 times as far as a walker. So if you get on a bicycle, the same amount of time, you can go maybe 2 or 3 times as far. So you're widening your horizons, but still, we're building our communities from back to the beginning of the civilization until, say, the 1930s and 40s. We built everything in a walking scale. And this is the principle of walking scale. The average person can walk 300 feet in a minute. So next time you go to a football game, into the stadium, you walk from one end zone to the other, it should take you a minute, 60 seconds. And if you divide a mile by 300 feet, you find the average person can walk a mile, say 17 and a half minutes, say 20 minutes in a town setting. And of course, you can go 2 or 3 times as far if you're on a bicycle. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the traditional town of Hershey simply because A, I have a tabloid that you can all pick up and take home and review. But B, because Hershey, unknown to many people, Hershey was built to be an ideal community. Now, Hershey, there is no municipality of Hershey. Hershey is a part of Derry Township, not your Derry Township, but Derry Township in Dauphin County. And it was, of course, it was built by Milton Hershey. And this is sort of a rough sketch I've done of Derry Township. Not very far away. Now, talking about a sense of community, why did Milton Hershey build a chocolate factory in Derry Township? Because that's where he was born. He grew up in Derry Township and wanted to build a home. And so his house, which is still there, Milton Hershey's house, is only less than a mile away from the chocolate factory. So Milton Hershey came up with a way to bring chocolate to the masses, as you know, and he made tens of millions of dollars. And a lot of people think that the big thing for Milton Hershey was making chocolate and having the chocolate factory. But the big thing for Milton Hershey was he wanted to build an ideal community. He built the chocolate factory to provide work for the workers. What he wanted to do was build a perfect community. So he built a chocolate factory, which when he built it was pretty nice looking. And then he built a traditional main street that was walkable with trolleys. And he made sure that the buildings were very nicely designed, an apartment store, and a bank, and a community center. He built the school buildings, the public school buildings, and he designed his town of Hershey, and he owned the whole thing. We're not talking about zoning here 100 years ago. He owned the whole thing. He designed it to be walkable. So here's the factory, and he had the rich people who were the managers of the factory living here, and everybody else was living here, but they were all within easy walking distance of each other. This was the public school system. Everybody could walk there in 20 minutes or less. The community center, the department store, the original Hershey Hotel. He built 2 golf courses, as you know, as an amusement park, originally built for the people in Hershey. And he was doing this as an idealist because he wanted to build what's the most perfect environment for somebody to live in. And then surrounding his town of Hershey, and he owned an awful lot of Derry Township, Hershey Trust still does, that's where the dairy farms were, providing the milk for the chocolate factory. Well, then the car comes around, and by the 1920s, there are lots of them around. And cars, as you know, can go very fast. Now you can go 20, 30, 40, 50 miles just in 1 hour in a car. And they're very versatile. They can go anywhere, especially on roads. That's a handy thing to have. And so by the 20s, our traditional towns started filling up with cars. Our countryside started filling up with cars. And then we had a real long hiatus. And the hiatus was called the Great Depression in the 1930s, when nobody was building anything, and not very many people could afford to buy cars. And then in the early 40s, we had the Second World War. But the war ends in 1945. And when the war ends and our servicemen come home, we're going to start the great suburban experiment. We're not going to live in Latrobe anymore. We're going to move out into the countryside. Everyone can now afford a car. We've built up an enormous manufacturing capacity in the United States. The rest of the world is in shambles because of the war. And so now we're going to build our houses out there in the countryside. We're going to have an inexpensive home, spacious lot, breathe in that fresh air. Well, it's going to be great. And now, instead of walking 20 miles to the chocolate factory, which is taxing to walk, we'll just get in the car and we'll drive. And if I'm driving 20 minutes, I don't have to live in Hershey anymore. I can live in much of Dauphin County, I can live in Lebanon County, I can live in Lancaster County, and still get to the chocolate factory. So soon we had tens of thousands of houses out there and what happened in the countryside. And then, of course, the retailers, they're moving out where the houses are. They're putting the stores out there, strip malls, regional shopping centers, power centers. And then the next wave was corporate centers, which we built outside of the countryside. So this is what happened to Milton Hershey's ideal dream. Here was his ideal town, and it was surrounded by dairy farms. And in the 60s, using money from the Hershey Trust, they created Penn State Hershey Medical Center, which is now the 3rd biggest medical center in the state, has 9,000 employees, bringing thousands of people to Derry Township, but they're not moving into Hershey in particular, they're moving all over these gray areas, or what might be gray areas, right here. Here's the line of car use, miles driven. Here's population growth. You can see car use is skyrocketing in comparison to population. So here's Erie Township, and the roads are filled up with cars. They've torn down an entire neighborhood for a parking lot to supply the Hershey chocolate factory, which itself was torn down later last year. They didn't bother worrying about pedestrians. If you had to walk somewhere and you're tough, just walking the berm of the highway. Kids are no longer walking to school, they're getting a bus. In fact, Erie Township, Dauphin County spends $2 million a year busing kids. Statewide, we spend more than $1 billion every year, $1 billion busing kids to school because we're so sprawled out. But now we're finding, as we're finding in Erie Township, that this doesn't turn out to be so great over the long term. Short term is great. Long term, not so great. The drive everywhere for everything lifestyle, well, first of all, sprawl is extremely expensive to build and to maintain. We have a transportation problem. We have a transportation problem because we build highways all over creation like there was going to be a never-ending supply of money. Cities like Latrobe are extremely efficient for transportation because things are close together. Okay? Then, of course, we have the economic crisis starting in 2008 and starts to become apparent to everyone that we've built up this enormous amount of debt. This crisis, the bottom line is people bought houses they couldn't afford. Because they built them out on large lots, driving everywhere, and a lifestyle that long term they can't afford. We're individually in a tremendous amount of debt. The state of Pennsylvania is an enormous amount of debt, and of course, the U.S. government is in a tremendous amount of debt. And as the baby boomers are retiring, and there's increased demand on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the debt, we find that there's less and less money for anything else. So we just can't afford to build a big house in the middle of nowhere. By the way, there's no furniture in this house, and people are so busy. So, and then the next thing is the health consequences of driving further. No surprise, 2/3 of all adults are overweight. Childhood obesity has tripled over the last 30 years, over the last 2 generations. And then there's the idea of the rest of the world following us. It was one thing when you have 300 million Americans driving everywhere for everything. It's another thing when you have 1.3 billion Chinese getting off their bicycles and getting in their cars. And that's exactly what's happening. Surprising everyone, China became the #1 car market in the world in 2009. They now sell far more cars in China than they do in the United States. We're #2. And also in 2009, they became the greatest polluter on earth. And it's only going to get worse and worse. And the Indians are not far behind. They've come up with a car in India, buy a new car for like $1,500. So, what this means is, as the developing world is starting to adopt this unsustainable lifestyle, the consequences on the planet are just going to be, frankly, catastrophic. And we're just starting to come around to that realization. There are fewer and fewer global warming gathers anymore. Everybody can see that it's happening. Last year we had the worst drought in the Midwest and the West and parts of the South in 50 years. And that drought isn't over. We just don't see the consequences until we start to get the spring and summer. We had tremendous amounts of fires. We had Katrina. And then we had Hurricane Irene going up and flooding Vermont. Unprecedented in the state of Vermont. And then last year we had Hurricane Sandy. Unprecedented destruction in New Jersey and the city of New York. And this is going to be, everyone recognizes this is going to become more common. So we just can't afford to keep driving everywhere, using our resources. So what's the solution? The solution is what's known as smart growth. What's smart growth? The city of Latrobe. Traditional towns where you don't use as many resources, and believe me, as a guy who's lived all 64 years of his life in traditional Pennsylvania cities and towns, you're not giving up a thing to live in a city and town. It's a vastly superior lifestyle as far as I'm concerned. Why does everybody like to see this little model of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood? Because it's the neighborhood we like to live in. You know, where there are lots of sidewalks and street trees and low places and people know their neighbors. Now, Milton Hershey, another little tidbit about Milton Hershey. Milton Hershey was not the first big manufacturer of chocolate. He was the first one in the United States. The first big manufacturer was Cadbury. The Cadbury brothers in England. And of course, he was very familiar with them. And the Cadbury brothers were also idealists, and they built an ideal town just out of Birmingham called Bourneville. It's still there. You go on Google Earth, you go down the streets and see it. It's a very lovely town. And the English were very interested in the idea of what would a perfect town look like. And they came up with what's known as the Garden City by a guy named Ebenezer Howard. And the first one that was built in Latrobe, it's about 35 miles north of England, of London, excuse me. The idea was you'd have the health of the country and the comforts of the town. And they surrounded their town with a growth boundary. And I just emphasize it here. This is from Google Earth. And the idea was Letchworth did and does have about 30,000 people. You can have a fine school system, you can have jobs, you can have a library, you can have everything you need within 2 square miles. But as soon as you get to the edge of town, you can walk right out into the countryside. And after the Second World War, the English came up with the idea of what they call green belts, which is saying right outside the edge of town, we're not allowing any development. And they're very top down in England, not like this country. But this is Bath, the city of Bath, city of 100,000 people, and this will never be developed. So you can walk out of Bath into the countryside anytime you want. And one of the side effects of green belts was not only protecting open space, which was great, but it also protected retail in downtowns. And this figure says it all. 2/3 of all retail trade in England is still conducted in traditional downtowns. In the United States, it's less than 3%. But the best planned country I've ever seen is the Netherlands. The Netherlands is one of the most densely populated countries in the world. Yet, 83% of the Netherlands is open space, pure open space. It's amazing. How do they do this? Well, they do this by having a clear mark between towns and countryside. And they do this by encouraging people to walk and ride a bicycle because all the buildings are close to each other. In fact, the Netherlands has the highest percentage of walking and bicycling in the Western world, where nearly half of all trips are made by walking or riding a bicycle. Now here we are in central Amsterdam. If this girl keeps pedaling her bicycle, this is what she's going to see in 20 minutes. It's just a 20-minute bicycle ride away. This is the town of Oxford, and this is the same size as Latrobe, about 2.5 square miles. And this is where you can see where it stops, and the countryside starts. So it's very easy to get out into the countryside. And you can see there aren't any high-rises. None. They have the tallest buildings about 3 stories. They have single-family detached, but they're small. And they have townhouses, and they have apartment buildings, but they're not gigantically high. The Dutch devote as much space to bicycling and to walking as they do to cars. Cars are not, the king of the asphalt. These people on their bikes, they're going somewhere. This is transportation for them. So when you get on a bike path in Holland, you'll see that there are street signs out there that tell you where to go and how far it is. Because every road will have a bike path along it, which you can also use for walking, obviously. And instead of going to getting your car just to get a loaf of bread or some milk, you're just riding a bike to the local A&P. They don't have saddlebags in the bikes. For the big grocery shopping on the weekend, yeah, they hop in their cars and they go. But for the daily stuff, they just use the bicycle. Now, this might look very, very dangerous to us. We don't see very many bicycle helmets in Holland. Not that I'm recommending not using helmets, but nonetheless, the Netherlands is the safest place in the world to ride a bicycle. Well, because everybody does it and it's ingrained in their culture. So here's a babysitter with 3 young kids, and she's riding all around the Dutch countryside, miles and miles and miles, because they have bike trails everywhere, and she can do this perfectly safely. And even if you're too old to get on that bicycle, you have to be pretty old in the Netherlands not to get on a bike, you just get on your scooter, same purpose, get on that bike trail, go out and get the cows if you want. Now, we have a number of cities in the United States that have growth boundaries. This is my favorite. This is Davis, California. And I just highlighted the growth boundary for you. Davis has about 100 miles of bike lanes, 50 miles on the street, 50 miles separated bike lanes. They don't do any school busing. Davis Unified School District, except for special education. In years, they have a bike parking lots in front of the high school instead of a huge parking lot for cars. And kids date on bicycles. It's perfectly fashionable to do that. And University of California, Davis, all the kids get around in their classes riding their bikes. And it provides this wonderful green, quiet atmosphere where you see so many people either walking or riding a bicycle where they want to go in perfect safety. It's really, to me, an ideal way to live. And you're starting to see, okay, Davis is warm, it's very warm all year long. Here's Madison, Wisconsin, which definitely, gets cold. And right now they're at 4% bike use, which is very high for this country. But they're shooting for 20% bicycle use. And they're adding bike lanes like crazy in Madison. They already have quite a few. But if you want to talk about a really cold country with bicycles, you can't beat Ola, Finland. Ola, Finland is a city of 140,000 people, and it's just south of the Arctic Circle. I mean cold. And look at this. They have 326 miles of bicycle lanes. 40% of their trips are made by walking or riding a bicycle. And bicycle lanes all over. They pride themselves on plowing them. And by 6 a.m., they're all plowed and salted. And here it is, the average temperature, the mean temperature in January in Ola is 12 degrees. And here are these hardy Finns riding around their bicycles and loving it. Okay? So, when we think about the problems that we face in this nation, the economic problems, the social problems, the environmental problems, the health problems, they can all be greatly alleviated by building traditional communities. I'm on the school board in my town of Hylton, and I'm well aware of how crazy we are about athletics, the planned athletics in our high schools and so forth. But let me just ask you this question. How many of these Wildcats are going to be playing football once they're in their 20s? How many of these girls will be playing softball? How many of these boys are going to be playing hockey? The answer is virtually none. But walking is something you do from the time you're about 1 year old and you're tottering on your feet until you're ready to lay down and die. My mother walked until the last 3 days of her life. And bicycling is something you can learn from a very young age. So think about it. When I was in elementary school in the 1950s, I learned to read. And reading is a skill that I've used every day of my life, many, many times a day, every day of my life. What's the skill, the basic skill for physical education for healthy heart? It's walking. And if you get kids in the habit early, and I always walk to school, kids in the habit of walking to school or riding their bicycles, that's a habit that they can keep with them. And they're going to want to live in places like Latrobe because here you can walk, and in a lot of Westmoreland County, you just can't. So, going back to Derry Township, it was mentioned earlier this evening that the Strong Cities was in Derry. I was there about 2 years ago and did this tabloid. I hope you'll pick up. But Derry Township is saying, you know what, we made a mistake. We got away from Milton Hershey's vision of the ideal town. We started sprawling all over creation. We need to start centralizing development. I suggested that they do a growth boundary around the city. I'm not suggesting anything like that in Westmoreland County or beyond that. They can do this in Derry Township for the simple reason that the Hershey Trust owns half of Derry Township. So they own a tremendous amount of farmland. It's either rented out or it's part of the Milton Hershey School. So they have a lot of protected open space. But something else they have that you would be very interested in is they've got a really nice trail. And there's just a couple of missing links. This is their school system. The Derry Township School District is all in one place, high school, middle school, elementary school. And so if they just, and right now they're using this trail for recreation because that's the way America thinks. But if you start thinking about it as a transportation corridor, and you just close a couple of those links, now you have a total way of getting from one end to the other. You've got a lot of doctors and people in the medical profession who are big into health. Get on your bicycle, folks, and just ride to the Penn State Hershey. Or get on your bicycle and ride to school, because with just a couple of links, you can get there. What Latrobe is a heart healthy community, which is my town of Pottstown. I'm very fond of Pottstown. As I said, I've lived here for 40 years. This color doesn't turn out too well here. This is a yellow star over my house. And then these are red stars on things that I do on a weekly or a monthly basis. Pretty much everything I can do within a 10-minute walk of my house. I can literally go because everything is so accessible. Now, this is a picture of my father. My father died in 1950. I did not know him because I wasn't even 2 years old when he died of a massive heart attack. And when I was growing up in the 20s, I wanted to see that I wanted to try and increase the odds that I lived beyond 40. And I wrote a book when I was 28 called Aerobics by Kenneth Cooper, an Air Force surgeon and cardiologist. And he had a system, and he said if you walk a mile in 14 and a half minutes or less, give yourself 2 points. And if you work 30 points a week, I guarantee you will have a healthy heart. So I was very motivated, and I started walking. I don't know how all this shows up, but I soon got to 5 miles. And I would say 6 out of 7 days I walk 5 miles a day, and I can do that easily because Potsdam has about 120 miles of sidewalks. So I have an east-west route, and I have a north-south route, and then I have a route you can't tell too well, but there's a greenway along the Schuylkill River, and I can walk from my house and actually walk all the way to Reading if I want to take a day to do it. But it's very easy to do because of the fact that it's a traditional town. And if I get on my bicycle and I go in that greenway, I don't have to pedal for about 15 minutes, and it can actually look like 100 years ago. There are sections of the greenway that look pretty much like Pennsylvania in the early 1900s. So, what about Latrobe? Well, the first thing, as a non-Latrobe, but just looking at Latrobe on Google Earth, you see this is the elementary school. To my mindset, this is the center of town, it's the elementary school. And you see, a 20-minute walk from the elementary school encompasses practically the entire city. A totally walkable city. And if you have a trail, if you have a way to do it, or a bike lane, I mean, here's the junior-senior high school, 2.4 miles. Here's the St. Vincent College, 1.8 miles. Here's the Lincoln Highway, commercial area, and that's here. 1.9 miles. So once you're on a bicycle, that's barely 15 minutes. So everything is really close together with some minor and not terribly expensive changes in infrastructure. So I suggest to you that the future of Pennsylvania, as all these forces converge, and of course Denny Puga was talking about baby boomers who want to live somewhere where there's a hospital nearby, that's a handy thing, who want to be able to walk places, who want to be able to socialize. For most everybody, and families want to have children, they want the children to be able to walk places on their own. This is the town of the future. These are the places of the future. Now, when I go down Lincoln Highway, which Frank, you'll agree with me, it's ugly as sin, and we have some that are even uglier in southeastern Pennsylvania. It seems hard to top, but we can top it. In my section of Pennsylvania, you look at this and you say, this was an experiment. As Winston Churchill used to always say, you can count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. So here we are looking at this sprawl. It was an experiment. And early on it seemed like a great idea. But in the long run, it is not sustainable. Going back thousands of years from the days of the ancients, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the medieval era, colonial times, right up to the 1950s here in Pennsylvania, the vast majority of non-farming people lived in villages, they lived in towns, they lived in the neighborhoods of cities because they made so much sense as a way of life. Standing in the back patio of my house on a cool winter evening, looking over moonlit rooftops of the clock tower of Transfiguration Lutheran Church, which has been standing since the days of Abraham Lincoln, I feel a sense of kinship with my neighbors and the generations that have lived under its flood. If we want to encourage caring in Pennsylvania, I've come to believe we need places like Latrobe to care about. Thank you very much.